Good evening, Titans. This is Mr. Simpson, and tonight we'll be studying lesson 7.5, which is titled Factoring x squared plus bx plus c. Remember, this is a quadratic trinomial, and a lot of times when we are multiplying two binomials in the form of, let's say, x plus 3 and x plus 2, our answers would end up being a quadratic trinomial because we'd have x times x is x squared, we'd have plus 2x, we'd have plus 3x, and we'd have plus 6. And so then we'd add our like terms, we'd have x squared plus 5x plus 6, and now this is a quadratic trinomial. So our goal today is, given the quadratic trinomial in this form, we want to come up with what two binomials multiplied to give me that answer. So the first type we're going to look at is when the constant at the end is a positive. So for example, if I have x squared plus 6x plus 5, and we want to think, okay, we're going to multiply this, we're going to decide what two binomials multiply to give me that quadratic trinomial. Well, again, if we think about how do we get x squared? Well, we get x squared by taking x times x. And so I'm kind of using the FOIL method because we want to think about how do we get that first term. And so we take first times first to get that first term. Now we have to look at the last term. And the last term is 5. And again, I know we have still the outsides and the insides, but let's look at the last term. And so we use what we call the diamond method. Now, a lot of times it just looks like an X. The reason it's called the diamond method because in a game that they use, it looks like this. But we usually just draw the X portion of this. And in this, the top number is the last number, and the middle number is the bottom number. Now, what we want to have is that we have to decide the numbers that go here and here are the numbers that multiply to give me 5, but add to give me 6. So we think about this, and again, that's kind of what comes from right here. All right, what multiplies to give me 5, but adds to give me 6? Well, the factors of 5 are just 1 and 5. Well, 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 plus 5 is 6, so we use 1 and 5. So in this problem, we'd have x plus 1 times x plus 5. And this would be the answer. These would be the two binomials that would multiply together equal x squared plus 6x plus 5. Now, if this last term is positive, but the only thing that changes is that this middle term, instead of being a positive, is a negative 6x. Well, now they need to add to be a positive 5, or multiplied, to be a positive 5, but add to be a negative 6. Well, again, remember, a negative times a negative is a positive 5, but a negative plus a negative would add up to a negative 6. So now, if the middle term is negative, then instead of these being pluses, these would have to be minuses. Okay? And that's what we'd have for our answer. So let's look at a few examples. So this one is x squared plus 7x plus 6. So again, I know right away that my trying to look for the two binomials, because it's just x squared, I know it has to be x and x. And now what multiplies to give me 6, but adds to give me 7? Now sometimes it's easiest if we write down the factors of 6. Well, 6, we have 1 and 6, and we have 2 and 3. Well, which of those add up to 7? Well, 1 and 6. So my answer would be x plus 1 and x plus 6. If we look at number 2, again, because this is a positive 8 and a positive 9, then both these numbers have to be positives because, again, they multiply to give me a positive 8 and they add to give me a positive 9. Well, now again, if we think of 8, I have 1 and 8 and I have 2 and 4. Those are my only options. Well, 1 and 8 add up to 9. So then my answer would be x plus 1 times x plus 8. So now we're going to look at one where the middle term is negative. So again, we have to have a positive 12 here, but a negative 8. So now again, we're looking at factors of 12. So we have 1 and 12, we have 2 and 6, and we have 3 and 4. Now because this is still a positive 12, the signs of the two factors here must be the same sign because they have to multiply to be a positive, but in this case, because they have to add to be a negative, they both must be negative. So again, we're thinking about what adds to give me 8. Well, that'd be a negative 2 and a negative 6. So I'd have x minus 2 times x minus 6, and there's my final answer. And again, these multiply to give me a positive 12, but they add to give me that negative 8. So again, x times x is my x squared. Negative 6x and negative 2x add up to be my negative 8x. Then negative times negative is a positive 12. Alright, the next one, and again, it looks weird. This should just be like minus c. Might make it easier to understand if that was a minus c. So now we're looking at x squared minus 4x minus 5. And the most important thing is we're looking at when this last number is negative. So if that last number is negative, then we know that our two factors have to be different signs. So we still have to multiply to be a negative 5, but in this case we have to add to be a negative 4. So if this has to multiply to be a negative 5, that means one of these numbers has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. Well, the factors of 5 again are just 1 and 5. So to get a negative 4, the larger number would have to be the negative, the smaller number would be the positive. Now these are the two numbers that are going to go into our binomial. Again, we need x squared, so that's x and x. But then we'd have plus 1 and minus 5. And again, if we would check this, whether we use FOIL or box, we would get that answer. So we're only going to look at this one example right here, right? Because that's the one that has a minus at the end. So again, I know it has to be x and x. And now, what factors of a negative 15 add up to a positive 2? So, factors of 15. Well, I have 1 and 15, and I have 3 and 5. Now, because this last number is negative, then these two signs have to be different. So, I always think, well, which ones subtract to give me a positive 2? Well, 5 minus 3 is a positive 2, which means I'd have to have a positive 5 as one of my factors and a negative 3 as my other. So 5 and negative 3, because again, 5 times negative 3 is a negative 15, but 5 plus negative 3 is a positive 2. And then there's my final answer. Okay, so those are the type of factoring that we're going to be working with today. It's called quadratic trinomial factoring with a leading coefficient of 1. And when we are looking to factor quadratic trinomials, your answer, if factorable, will be 2 binomial factors.